doesn't seem as though there's very many industries in the world where you test for security after you've shipped the goods. You can imagine a plane being tested afterwards and then finding it's got some vulnerabilities and it crashes. And yet in the software industry, we seem to accept this.
I honestly can't think of an industry that produces any kind of an artifact that's impactful, that the element of risk and security isn't built into the assembly process of that artifact. But I think in the software development world, that has been ignored partly for two reasons. One is the software development industry is a fairly young industry. So, it dates back probably no more than 50, 55 years or so. And if you really think about the majority of the innovations that have happened in the area of client-server computing and ultimately web-based computing and so on, we're dating back about 20, 25 years tops. And so, the big emphasis of software development for the long time has been innovation. And innovation, of course, has come at the cost of how can we ship products into the market as fast as possible. And some of the competitive pressures from different independent software vendors obviously have accentuated the need to build the right amount of features in as expeditious amount of time as possible, because time to market has been a key element in that competitive pressure between different ISVs. And so that, of course, has come at a cost of ignoring some important steps during the assembly process of the software, security being one of them, of course. The advent of web interfaces and especially the invention of web services and the services-oriented architecture has suddenly exposed that attack surface to everybody. And not only that, but has made software very complex. There's a lot of input points and there's a lot of cross-communication between various software components. And so that ultimately has yielded hackers to look at software as the new attack vector, as the new attack surface, saying, well, this is a really easy place for us to start. And I think with the combination of them doing more damage at the software layer, there's various statistics that articulate anywhere from 70 to 90% of all attacks right now are targeted at the application of the software layer, is now finally evangelizing the need to push software security assurance and software risk mitigation upstream in the assembly process and the software development lifecycle rather than a reactive process, which has been the case for the longest time.
And if I was a developer, what would I do to be able to deal with the increasing level of complexity that's in the development community today? Because if I was developing an online banking application, I would be getting regular requests to be able to add new features into the application. There'll be new releases of Java coming out and new frameworks and so on. And frankly, I'd probably be struggling just to keep up with the change, the pace of change in the technology, putting things onto mobile. So how would I cram something else in, something as important as security, when I'm already struggling to be able to do everything that I have to do and deal with the pace of change?
Software developers and engineers typically adopt products in only two ways. One is organic, which is a bottoms-up adoption, and that only happens when you make their life easier. So when, great examples are integrated development environments or compilers or debuggers. They typically allow software developers to do their job more effectively. Those, of course, are adopted organically by themselves and pushed upwards. Ultimately, the enterprise buys the solutions that they need. But if you take a look at, equal to those, there's a bunch of activities that have to happen during the software development lifecycle that don't necessarily improve the efficiency of software development, but they're very important. So, a great example, if you go back about 20 years ago when source control systems were being introduced, I remember this very clearly where, the first 2 or 3 years of the introduction of source control system, no software developer wanted to use them because they were really slow. I mean, they had their source on their machines and they were happily going about writing their software. Of course, they had to deal with issues of software being out of sync when they operated in a team environment. But then when source control systems were introduced, those source control systems were sitting separate from those machines that they were developing the software, and the links were slow, etc. So it was very painful. And I remember going through that process saying, look, it's something we have to do. So it was one of those mandated solutions on top of software development that ultimately upper management drove with software development. And now, after 15 years, 20 years, we look at source control systems and say it's unfathomable for us to think that any software is developed without a source control system in place. In fact, I can't think of one. And I think where we are with software security is one of, it's not something instinctively software developers are going to wake up and say, I need to improve the a risk posture. I need to improve the security posture of my software, but as one that will be mandated and asked of them, and not just by the CIO and the Chief Information Security Officer, which their influence is increasing every day, but also from the line of business managers. I think one of the things we're seeing a big trend in is the person that runs commercial banking, for a bank, the person that runs investment banking for a financial services company. Those line of business executives are now understanding the risk inherent in software, and so they're holding software development groups responsible for ensuring that software security vulnerabilities are non-existent in the software that's being shipped. So I think, in summary, we can only expect software developers to be trained and educated on matters of software security, but ultimately I think the mandate and the use of software security assurance in general would come from the appropriate constituents of the company, like line of business managers, like CISOs. The good news is the influence of the CISO is increasing dramatically. I think it has gone from a role that companies would have just so that they can claim they have a Chief Information Security Officer to now them reporting directly into the CIO. Oftentimes we're seeing now them reporting into the CEO of the company directly as a Chief Security Officer, combining both physical and information security. A good way to get started, typically we say, for a CISO to get an inventory and a baseline of the software assets that are important to them, and then attach a risk profile to the software assets immediately. And one of the first things you want to do is you don't want to treat all software assets in your company, with the same brush. Basically, you don't want to. You want to categorize and prioritize them in terms of the risk profile of that software. And then what you want to do is you want to sort of transparently expose the risk of that software to the people that care about that risk. And line of business managers know risk very well. And all they have to be evangelized and educated is there's this asset called the software that just so happens to run your business, and there's inherent risk in that software. And if you do a good job educating those people, what you're going to find is with the CISO's influence and with line of business managers' influence that you have a really good chance affecting the software development change across the organization.